Favorite piece of advice ever came from my dad, and he reminds me of it often still. And that's always let somebody else tell you no. Because if you already count yourself out, if you already say, well, no, I don't have a college degree, so I'll never be able to do that. If you put yourself out there and ask or meet with somebody, you will probably be pleasantly surprised at the amount of yeses that actually come from just you being obedient to the prompting and not being afraid to step out in faith.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Trailblazer Talks Podcast. I'm excited because this week I'm honored to have on the show a newer friend that I met since moving to Columbus, and we met probably about 6 months after I moved to Columbus with my husband and just became fast friends. Chelsey is a wife, a mother of two, a Christian author and speaker who helps women apply God's word to everyday living. So Chelsey, thank you so much for being on the show, and would love for you to introduce yourself so people can get to know you.
I am so excited to be here. And yes, we met and hear her story, which is so fun. It's so fun to meet people in ministry in real life. Courtney, I'm sure you can attest to this in the online ministry world and writing world. Sometimes I feel like we never meet people in person. And so it was such a joy to meet you. And yes, fast friends. We both love coffee. But what I love to do is teach women through just sharing my own life experience and walk with the Lord of applying his word to our actual everyday living. I feel like we can read the Bible. There's so many Bible reading plans that are amazing, but sometimes it gives us like a very high view. And it's how in the world do I apply Exodus and Leviticus to my everyday living? And I love to just share what God's taught me through what his word says, but making it a little more applicable. Like I would say with Exodus and Leviticus, it's a lot about order of things, doing things in a fashion that is godly. And okay, well, I can actually look at the way I run my home. Like you said, I have two littles. They are 7 and 3.5. And I'm like, you know what? I can apply a lot of Leviticus and Exodus even to the way I parent my kids. So that is my favorite thing to do. And aside from that, I am a wife. Corey and I have been married almost 10 years. Or no, we just hit 10 years. We hit 10 years in December. This year's gone really fast. So we hit 10 years. And yes, I love to write words for Jesus and speak about him and just do real life. I'm a real kind of person. We are not looking for perfection in this space.
Yes. Yes. No, that's what I love about you, and I think why we connected so quickly, of just like our love for writing and just all the things. But one of the first questions I love asking people who come on the podcast, since it's called the Trailblazer Talks, is what is one piece of advice that you've learned on your trail in life that maybe you would give someone who is just like a few steps behind you?
Favorite piece of advice ever came from my dad, and he reminds me of it often still. And that's always let somebody else tell you no. And what I mean by that is if there is something that feels outlandish, like you're reaching for the stars, something is a dream of yours, which we'll kind of get to that with me in a little bit, ask anyway and let them tell you no. Because if you already count yourself out, if you already say, well, no, I don't have a college degree, so I'll never be able to do that. If you put yourself out there and ask or meet with somebody, you will probably be pleasantly surprised at the amount of yeses that actually come from just you being obedient to the prompting and not being afraid to step out in faith. So that has shaped so much of the last 10 years for me, especially the last 6, and writing and speaking and all of it. It's just been following the prompt, not counting myself out, and yeses have happened. There have been some no's, of course, but the yeses have been, had I let myself just close the door, I would have missed out on so many opportunities.
Yeah. No, I love that piece of advice because I think I have unintentionally done that to myself before too, where I'm like, they're probably going to say no, or I don't know. But then on the flip side, I'm like, well, the worst they could say is no. So why not just like put myself out there or ask or whatever? And that's something I've been learning in this season of life, is not counting myself out of things, or like not waiting for permission. That's been like a big theme this like spring, is just like not waiting for permission. Like God already gave us the permission to do whatever he's called us to. Like, I don't need to wait for some like arbitrary benchmark of permission to be like, okay, now you can go do it.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's
But speaking of like writing and everything, I know you have been writing for a while now and you have 2 books and you also are currently writing a book. And that's been such a cool story that I would love to talk about, and just want to like hear more about your story with writing, kind of how'd you know you were called to write and what does that look like for you walking that out?
So I've always loved to write. Like from the time I could form letters, so probably kindergarten, first grade, I have loved to write stories, make up stories. A funny story, I went door to door and literally sold to my neighbors homemade postcards that I had like written fun things on. And my parents were like, you cannot sell postcards you colored. But they bought them and I thought this is amazing. But I've just loved to write. I've always loved it. And I would say I remember really, really loving it in fifth grade. That was when we really got into like creative writing. And kind of backing up a little bit, I grew up in the church. So as a Christian author, I grew up in the church, but I didn't come to surrendering my life to Jesus and actually walking with him till I was 19, got rebaptized when I was 20. And so looking back, I see God's hand, especially in the writing world. I can really see it in fifth grade. I loved creative writing. That was my favorite part of school. I didn't really like the rest of it. I loved that. And then into high school, same thing. I loved anything that had to do with writing. And in college, I really got away from that. I did 1 year at school. And then I would say once I started walking with Jesus, which was in 2011, I started journaling because that's what you do when you're a Christian. You journal, right? I say that kind of tongue in cheek because as somebody that loves to write, I just like to process anyway. But I feel like, oh, this is why people journal as believers because you're documenting everything the Lord is doing. And so I started doing that. I was filling journals and just talking with the Lord. And then over time, my son was born in 2017. And after just that first full year of being a stay at home mom, and God really growing me in areas that I just didn't know before, I had a conversation with my dad, and he had said he really missed hearing about me writing. Like I used to talk about writing and journaling and my time with the Lord all the time. And he's like, I miss hearing you talk about that. And I had been involved in Bible studies and things at church, but I just really felt like I don't know how to have time for this thing that I love so much. And so he really pressed me. He felt very nudged by the Lord to have this one specific conversation with me. And I'm so grateful that he did that because that kind of opened up, well, it did open up. God used that to open up this jar that just has given so much life to me and such a safe place between me and Jesus to hash through a lot of things on paper. I actually have one journal that I've told my husband, you are not allowed to open that unless I'm dead. Nobody's opening that unless I'm dead. And I want that to be a gift to our kids and even to him that they can open that up someday if God forbid something happens to me when they're still adolescents, but being able to open that and see mom struggle with things. But through this more ministry writing, I've been able to share so much of my heart with the Lord, but then seeing how God has used it to encourage other women. You'll not find me as one that's a cheerleader. I love to like come alongside people, but I'm very much the person that's writing the things that are really hard and difficult in hopes that someone else is going to be like, oh, thank God I'm not the only person that has done X, Y, and Z. And so that's really 2018, 2019 was when I really started in the ministry side of writing. And from that has just come all kinds of opportunities that have been so cool. And honestly, when we think about it, it's how I came to meet you.
Mhm.
I know we'll talk about this a little more too, but I think sometimes we can think at the beginning when so I love to write and I suddenly felt God opening up this door and really carving out time for me to do this. And sometimes we can get stuck in just thinking that's the only thing. But he has opened so many doors just from saying, yes, I am going to start writing for the Lord. And I think when we just are open handed with that and say, I'm going to do this thing that you're prompting me to do, kind of exactly what your show's about. This trail all of a sudden goes places that we never saw coming.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I know that your first book is more of him, less of me, and it's more of a devotional. It's like a 52-week devotional. I'd love to hear the story of just kind of like how that came about, like how you went from like writing to like, I'm going to write a book, and like how that kind of came to be, and like a little bit about the book and what is the biggest takeaway for that book.
So that also stems from that one conversation that I had with my dad. I started really praying through what that looked like. I took that whole month of December. We had that conversation in November of 2018, and I promised I would pray through the month of December on what that looked like. And I really felt the Lord prompting me to start a podcast. And it was funny because I thought, well, I thought this was writing and now I'm going to talk, but I knew I love to talk about Jesus. And John 3:30 became the message of that, which is he must increase and I must decrease. So that became the podcast. And very early on in the show, like I would say within the first 10 weeks, I just really thought like this could totally be a devotional someday. And I remember talking to my mom about it and she was like, oh my goodness. I was just thinking the other day she could totally write a book like about this. And I am one that loves to go read reviews. Like I read reviews on your podcast or my podcast and other people's. Like I just love seeing what people have to say. And one of the girls that I mentored left a review and said that she used my podcast as a devotion, like a weekly devotion. And I was like, no way. And this is all around the same time. And so I was like, okay, I have no idea what it looks like to write a book. But in being obedient, starting the podcast, I was writing everything like verbatim because I love to write and I love to talk. And so here I had notebooks filled with words that went along with each podcast episode. And so I started just chiseling away at that, writing devotions that went along with each podcast episode. They all came together, and that was in 2020 when I actually wrote the book and then pitched it and got signed with my publisher. And lo and behold, a book became a thing. And what I love about that book is it's so much of my life before Jesus. It's 52 weeks of all types of different things that I felt like the Lord was removing from my life. Like one thing that pops in my head is goodness. I have like so many. Trading an anxious heart. It's something about an anxious heart. Obviously, I wrote this a couple years ago, but an anxious heart, or there are a lot of things about past decisions I had made where I was able to not only verbally process it in a podcast so people could dive deeper, but writing these things out where it shows people they can find themselves within my life story. And since there's 52 to choose from and 52 to walk through, there's a lot there where maybe they didn't personally walk through that in their life, but they're reading that either thinking, oh my gosh, this is what my daughter's walking through. I cannot tell you how many emails I have gotten in the last 5 years where it's been an older mother that has like teenage to early college age boys and girls. And they've read it and thought, this is what my child's walking through right now. And now I have some perspective on how I can pray for them. And so that's been a really cool piece of the way God used so much of my story in these 52 different topics of making him the center of my life. And there's an application with each devotion. Like I said, the podcast, there's an episode that goes along with each one, which for someone that wants to go a little deeper, because it is weekly and marinate on it a little more, that's really helpful. But I love that one because I feel like it's holding my life before Jesus and walking with him all at the same time. Whereas now the ones that I've written before or that I've written now are very much, here's what God's taught me over the last 14 years walking with him, which is crazy. That's gone by really fast.
Hey friends, interrupting this episode for just a moment to let you know about the resources that my company, Little Creative Company, offers. We love bringing clarity to your calling and mission through building a stronger online presence for you. With our 2-week website packages, branding, marketing strategy, and SEO services will help you increase your impact for the kingdom. If your DIY brand is ready for an upgrade, let us help you take it to the next level. Send us an email at hello@littlecreativecompany.com or visit our website at littlecreativecompany.com. You can also find the links in the show notes. Okay, now back to today's conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes by so fast. And I remember when was it? That Ethos at the little market that they had. I picked up your devotional and I've loved it. It's been so good. And I know that now you're also writing a new book, and you also released a book in, was it that December or November last year? So what does that process kind of look like, of like knowing like each of these different books to write, and just what does that journey look like with God, of like kind of speaking to you in that and like walking that out in obedience?
Goodness. I very much feel like the one that came out in November, December was for Advent. It was titled A Thrill of Hope. And that really was spurred on by losing my grandpa. So I'm very much in the moment. Like, what I'm writing is what I'm walking through currently. And so for that one, so much of the focus was obviously on hope, but finding hope and seeing the light of Jesus, even in the midst of grief. And even though the whole book wasn't even about grief, like I feel like somebody not walking through grief could just read that as an Advent devotional. And it's great. But there's glimmers of when we're walking through sadness and darkness and despair, that the Lord is always there. And that book was so healing for me, in the sense of, I very much, when I lost my grandpa, we were thick as thieves, like the best of friends. And I remember thinking, how on earth am I going to walk through my most sacred time of year without one of my most favorite people? I was thinking it before he even died. And we're coming up on a year. It was June 6th that he passed. And I remember thinking, before he was gone, how am I going to handle life without him? And maybe to some people that sounds really weird. But for me, the Lord used writing through that to see, this is exactly how you walk through life without somebody that is also residing in heaven. Like, I remember, it was, sorry if I get choked up, it was the day before he passed. And I was sitting there with him, and he was not like speaking at that point in time. But I said, heaven has never felt so close. Like, in that moment. And I remember thinking, this is what God is using to reveal himself to me. I can literally feel the presence of God so close. Like, I felt like the veil felt like it was real close to being torn. So being able to also write through that, and getting to document too, like how close that felt. And honestly, how close heaven is. I think we think it's so far off, when really it's here. It's here. It's so thin. The air is so thin. And so when I wrote that, I just think God used it to heal a very broken part of my heart. And he showed me that, because I kept thinking too, like, who's going to fill that void? There's nobody that can fill that void. And God was so kind to show me that nobody will ever take the place of who my grandpa was to me. And nobody should take that place. Like, that part of my heart felt a love so deep, but that in God's kindness, he would meet me in that, and that he would really take away me feeling like, this void needs to be filled. I mean, truly, I actually said to my husband one of the nights, I was like, you have big shoes to fill. Said my grandpa was the best encourager. And he's looking at me like, I will never fill those shoes. And God showed me, through spending a lot of time with him through that over last summer, that nobody's going to fill his shoes. But Jesus is going to lead me through that. So that was really that book. And then this book now is on motherhood, and I'm almost finished writing it. I have 9 devotions left. It's titled Mercy in the Margin, Finding Jesus in the Fringes of Motherhood, which, goodness, I've even said this one, and maybe you're like this too. Writing is very healing for me. It feels like worship, like how people feel when they're on a stage singing. I feel like that's what my heart feels when I'm writing words. And this one on motherhood has been so cool because it's given me an opportunity to really reflect in a way of seeing Jesus in things that I maybe didn't really look that hard into. But also, it goes back to just why I love sharing Jesus anyway, is how do we apply God's word to today and not change God's word for today? Because I think oftentimes people, oh, let's make this sound better to make it fit culture. And I'm like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
You need to apply what it actually says today. And especially for me in motherhood, I very much have to go looking for Jesus sometimes. Like as a stay-at-home mom, my life is pretty monotonous. Now that we're in summer, it'll be changed up a little bit, but a lot of it is the same. It's a lot of repetition. But when I really look for Jesus, I find him. And that's what this whole book is about. It's also 52 devotions. I don't know if they're going to do it as a 52 day or a 52 week. But there will be 52 of them, which I love. I love when the Lord just keeps things like going. But it's 52 devotions on finding Jesus in that specific moment in motherhood. And while motherhood doesn't look the same for everybody, whether it be how you got there or just what your day to day looks like, every single one of us has felt something the same, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The circumstance might be different, but we've all felt grief. We've all felt sorrow. We've all felt worried and anxious and fearful. We've all felt the high highs and the low lows like 5 minutes apart. I feel like that's so much of what motherhood is. It's like, this is so amazing. And then, oh my gosh, I have to discipline this. And I was just not quite ready for that. Or it's, oh my gosh, we had the best day ever. And then it's the end of the evening and my son will share something that he heard somebody say and be like, what does this mean? And I think, oh boy, okay. I wasn't quite ready for that conversation at the age of 7, but God has been so faithful in those moments to show up with the words and to show me that I don't have to have it all figured out. And honestly, and I write about this, it's like threaded through the whole book, but it is totally okay and honestly better to not think we have it all figured out or that we even need to. Because for my kids to see me and for just women in general that I'm mentoring, for the girls behind me, for them to see like she doesn't know the answer to that. We can learn it together. Like that's such a blessing. And it shows we will never arrive here. But yeah, there's kind of my roundabout all the books.
Yeah. No, I think it's so cool too how God has kind of threaded all those different books with the different seasons and just how like his provision too and like the, journey of getting the like book deals and the different things. I just think it's so cool how God like kind of placed, different people in your life that led to those steps of obedience.
I share the story of how
Yeah.
this happened. Okay. Oh my goodness. So this is like wild. Okay. So the book that's now coming out, I went to a writers and speakers conference. Courtney's been there too in 2019. And I had met with a publisher, an acquisitions editor, and I had met with her and had pitched this idea. This was a book that's never even been a thing, but I had pitched this idea that I had, and she was so kind and so sweet, gave me great feedback, but it was ultimately a no. Like, you don't have enough experience, you haven't been writing long enough, all of that. And so I was like, that's great. Like, thank you. It's okay. But I loved meeting with her. Okay. So here we are then, a year and a half, 2 years later, my first book comes out with a different publisher. And then here we were last year. So 3 years later, then A Thrill of Hope comes out. But I started working on Mercy in the Margin. It'll be 2 years ago in June. And I really just kind of felt like the door was feeling like it was closing. I had been talking with some agents and things they would go somewhere and then they would stop. And then they'd go somewhere and then they'd stop, which is very normal in this industry. And finally, I spoke at a women's event and several ladies were like, when is your next book coming out? And I was like, I wish it were that simple to say and to answer, but it's not. And I went home and I thought, okay, I'm going to reach out to this one agent that I've been talking to one last time. And I heard nothing. And I was like, going back to that stuff my dad has always said to me, the encouragement from my dad of let somebody else tell you no. I thought, okay, I am going to try one more time. One more time, I will pursue Mercy in the Margin being published by a traditional publisher. And so I went looking again at Christian literary agents, and I came across my agent, Kathy. And truly, before I even had to read her bio, I saw her picture and I was like Jesus in her eyes. And I read her bio and I was like, this is like a match made in heaven. So I sent her all of my book stuff. We had a meeting. I signed with them as an agency. And even that normally takes quite a long time.
Mhm.
I feel like in my life, the Lord, it's like when something starts, it's just boom, it's moved.
Yeah.
Train has left the station. So signed with them. And because I'd been working on this for over 2 years, or about 2 years at that point, things were like pretty much ready to go. I didn't have that much to do. And she was like, okay, let's start pitching. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. And she had pitched to a handful of places, which means different publishing houses. And she does that. And I get a text from her like 2 weeks later. And she was like, hey, what do you think about us pitching Lifeway, which I've been writing for Lifeway for several years for one of their publications, one of their magazines. And I was like, hey, like if you want to do that, if the Spirit's leading you to do that, then obviously I would love to walk through that door if it's open.
Yeah.
And you all will not believe it. She pitched the same acquisitions editor that I sat across the table from in 2019. That was so kind and gave me the feedback, but it gave me a nice no. That is who she pitched. And she said yes. And Ashley said yes. And I'm still like, God, it is so cool. That was a 6-year trail, like so many dots connecting. And one thing I loved so much is what she said to me 6 years ago, the incredible constructive criticism that she gave me. I did all of those things. And then here we were 6 years later, and that constructive criticism was what they were looking for. And I think it's so cool when God does that. Even if things still don't quite turn out the way we were hoping, when he shows us that what somebody shared with us actually still stands with what they said years later, there's such integrity there.
Mhm.
And I love that all the more when I was like, oh my gosh, it was just so cool. So a whole 6-year journey, but have a meeting. And then obviously, ultimately, she loved the book and took it to pub board. And here we are. It's releasing next summer.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a cool story too, and really testimony too of encouragement, because I think sometimes we think when we get a no, it's like a forever no. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just a not yet. And I feel like most of the no's we get are sometimes not yets, where it's like if you feel like it's truly a dream that God put on your heart, a calling, and all the things, like I feel like sometimes he knows the exact perfect timing and season in which we need to do that thing, or when the right opportunity is. And sometimes the season like that we think we're ready, we like as much as we think we are, God's like, not quite yet. Like you need to walk through a little bit more stuff before that comes to fruition. I don't know if you feel that way with like, if you look back at like when you first pitched that book versus now writing it, like if you feel like now you're like, oh gosh, yes, this makes so much
I
sense.
just look at, especially because it's a motherhood devotional. I'm not an expert in parenting. My oldest is, like I said, he'll be 8. By the time this book comes out, he will be almost 9, which is insane. I'm like, how is he going to be a 9-year-old? But what I love about that is I will have had about a decade of motherhood under my belt. Well, when I was pitching this 2 years ago, he was like not even 5. When I think of, sure, I had wisdom when he was 5 and Collins was not even 1 yet. What I have walked through now having him involved in sports with kids that are older, having him actually in school environments, having him in these conversations that I was not yet ready for. I just see that the Lord was like, exactly what you said. No, not yet. Like,
Mhm.
still need to walk through this, because I would say last fall in mothering was the first time that I ever felt with Cam, especially our son, he's the oldest, where I felt like, oh my gosh, the hard things in his life right now, I cannot fix. Like, I remember one night I truly was crying tears that I was like, I have never felt like this before. I have never felt like there is nothing I can do but pray, but there's nothing I can do to fix what is happening. And that was really earth shattering and honestly very faith building for me, because I have seen God be faithful so much in Cam's life over the last 6 months. And I know, had I missed out on that, there is also just like a well of compassion I would have missed out on too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I could really call it wisdom, because like I said, I don't feel like I'm not right. This is not a parenting book by any means. This is truly showing a mom how to meet Jesus in the fringes of her day. I'm just hoping to be the stepping stone that gets her there. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, knowing like I have so much more compassion for the mom who is finally sitting somewhere going, I cannot fix this. There's nothing I can do. And I now get it. I'm like, that's the worst thing ever. And I know that as my kids get older and their problems become bigger and harder that I really cannot fix, like the Lord's just already preparing that and growing me in that area.
Yeah. Well, and I think about too with like as writers and speakers that God's called us to something, like he also knows who that's for. That like, yes, you're writing it for you in a sense, but you're also writing it for someone else. And I think it was Annie F. Downs that said this one time of like, God is like for authors, it's like he has this like bookshelf in heaven and he just is like, okay, here, you can pick this off the shelf and you write this now. And I think about the timing with that of like, you just never know. Like, some books are for certain seasons for other people. And like, who knows? Like, I definitely know there will be a lot of moms that will read that and be like, wow, like she wrote this straight to me. Like, how did she know? She read my mail. And I think about that sometimes when we write things. And it's so funny because even now, like, if I go back and read my book, I'm like, it almost is as if, like, I didn't actually write it, because like, read my words, I'm like, "I wrote that?" Like, I don't remember, like, writing that, or, like, I'm just like, "Wow, it's really speaking to me in a new season," and it's so funny because 'cause I'm like, that's what happens when we write with, like, the Holy Spirit's help. It's just, like it's just so cool.
I love that. And I was going to say, I've definitely very much felt that when I was reading A Thrill of Hope, because that was like a quick turnaround. Courtney even helped me when I self published that one. And I was like, help me, I'm panicking. Something's not working. Um, and she did, and she was awesome. But I remember reading that. So it wasn't a long turnaround. And I read that, and I am telling you what, there were several of those where I was like it was exactly what I needed to read, and to have your own words, like you said, because they were spirit led, minister to your heart is so incredibly special, because I'm like, wow, if God is using these to minister to my heart, and maybe I'm the only person that actually needed that ministering to, but if God does that for me, the fact that he does that for other people with these words is just, again, the fact that he would use me as his vessel and pour me out in that way is just it makes you feel like I feel like I have finally had to sit in like a very humble place. Like, God has also used writing to really humble me, because I'm like, wow, to be poured out for the Lord, it, it's an honor. And it doesn't matter if it's through a book that was self-published or a book that was traditionally published, like to be poured out, or if your mom at home, or doing whatever your job is, if you're a teacher or whatever it is, like being poured out for the Lord and whatever he's asked you to do is such a beautiful place to be, but such a humble seat.
Yeah, I always think about that because I'd heard a sermon, I think it was Jensen Franklin years and years ago, where he he used a pizza box as an example, but he was basically talking about how we are pure empty vessels for God, and like we have to like purify our hearts in order to be like purely used by him. And he like opened up like this pizza box and was like, this is like the vessel. And it was just kind of funny that it was a pizza box, but
Yeah.
But it just like that has stuck with me of realizing anytime I like get in my head or start to be like, because obviously like we carry these dreams that God's given us and we feel the weight of that calling and stuff. And then we get frustrated by the timing. I know I have. And I'm like, Lord, like, I just don't understand. Like, I want to do this thing for you. I'm doing it. I'm trying to be obedient. Why is it not happening? But then having that perspective of that we are vessels, that we are being poured out, and He has specific purpose and timing to all of it, I think just helps that waiting period that we have sometimes for these different dreams to have like just more perspective. And I know there's been times where you have had different waiting seasons with writing and then even just walking in obedience of stuff. I'd love to hear her story because I know that was also an act of obedience for you that you're like, I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know where we're going to host this thing, but we're going to do it. I'd love to just hear that story and just how you like heard that from God and decided to do that and just what it looks like to walk in obedience with the Lord.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you brought this up because truly I feel like this is one of those things where I'm like, oh my gosh, Lord, you are so cool. And thank you for using me. But I have always felt I love gathering people together anyway, but I really truly always felt like the Lord wanted me to gather women together. Like, and I know that feels very vague because it felt kind of vague to me. I was like, okay, like I can do that. I can host a Bible study in my home. Like I can do things. But I read The Dream Giver 2 summers ago. It's by Bruce Wilkerson. Highly recommend it. I read it, and as I was reading it, I knew. I was like, okay, I am supposed to host a women's worship gathering. I cannot sing. I can share the word of God. I cannot sing. I can hum, maybe hold a tune if there's music playing behind me, but I can't sing. So I don't know what this really looks like. I don't know where this could be. And so I sat with that for a bit. Then I read Love Lives Here by Maria Goff, Bob Goff's wife. And it was strange because it's kind of like a parenting book, sort of. You don't need to be a parent to read it, though. I highly recommend it. And I read it, and there was a specific chapter, it was near the end, where I was like, yes, sir. Yes, Lord. I will book a pavilion at a park
Yeah.
and I will host Hear Her Story. And so I looked up the pavilion right down the road from where I live and I booked it. And I was like, what am I even doing? Like, I'm booking a pavilion to have a worship night and I don't sing. But the Lord is telling me to do so. So I did that. I got flyers printed out and I called one of my girlfriends. She was actually at a church we were at formerly. And I was like, Sam, you are the only person God is putting on my heart. Like, will you be my wing girl? Because you can sing and I cannot. And she's like, absolutely. So we show up to this pavilion. Okay, I passed out like hundreds of flyers. I don't know who's coming. Maybe nobody. I didn't even know. And we show up in September and decorated a little bit. And I think 16 ladies ended up coming. And it was so special. Sam brings this gigantic boombox and we played the songs. Nobody sang, but we played the songs and I got lyrics printed out on paper and we just worshiped the Lord. I shared like a 8-minute testimony and just kind of why the Lord had stirred this in my heart and that it felt kind of wild to do something that I just did not know how it would turn out. So that one happens. And then I knew, I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to do this again. And that came where am I going to have this one? Because this is like February. It's cold. We can't be outside, Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And the Everell barn, which if you are local to Columbus, it's in Westerville. It's such a pretty barn. It was big enough to where we could do the lower level, which was for like 50 people or something. Or you could do the upper barn and it could hold like 230. And so this one I was like, my husband's also like, Chelsey, we can't just book venues. Like we can't just do this. And I was like, listen, God is telling me to do this. I'm doing it. And I'm going to have an offering in the back and it's going to be free. And we're just going to see how this goes. There ended up being a wait list. There was 150 ladies that registered to come. I think we ended up having 90 show up. And at the end of the night, I could not believe. And why do I say that? Why? I wish I knew the answer. Why we're like, I can't believe God did that. I'm like, well, look what he did with Noah. Why can't I believe what he's doing in my own life?
Mm-hmm.
But I could not believe when I got home and I get the offering box and I come inside, which by the way, the Lord provided the most special ladies to help lead worship. He's now done it 3 more times and we're going to keep on keeping on. But that night I get home and I open up the offering and I still could just cry. He covered that entire event plus what we needed to put down for the next one. I could not believe, because truly when my husband's like, we can't just like do that. I'm like, but I have to. And then to come home and not only see God's faithfulness in that way for me, but I'm sitting there looking at Corey as I'm like counting these dollars. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And I was like, Corey, he literally covered all of these expenses and plus half of what, because you have to pay half up front, you know. And it was just so incredible. And he did that. And I'm going to be totally honest. I felt prompted to do it again. So we did it again. And that's when I met you at this past August, and had the event. It felt like it was really hard. I'm not going to lie. I got in my car at the end of that and I was like, I am never doing this again. Never doing it again. That was so much stress. Like in the last few minutes before, I had only booked because again, this is not like a for-profit thing. So I'm keeping the barn. Like I'm only trying to use the barn for as little amount of time as we can. It was an hour before and I was truly dripping sweat. It was horrible. I was like, I'm never doing this again. Never doing it again. No. And I left that night and I shared with a couple friends that I was like, I'm never doing it again. And they were like, okay, just pray. Just pray. I was like, I will pray. But I was like, I didn't book it for the next time, nothing. And it took a couple weeks. And I really felt like the girls that led worship, like they became my village. They have become my like prayer girls because I actually finally reached out to them and I was like, I need to be really open with you guys. Like, I don't ever want to do this again. And okay, well, we need to pray. And so we prayed and we booked it again. And the one that just happened, which was the one that you were at, that you sponsored, it felt like Christmas morning. Like I could cry. And I feel like the Lord having me persevere through that one where I was like, I am never doing this again. And for him to nudge me again to be faithful, just be faithful. I'm like, okay, I can be faithful and I'm going to have other people that have to be faithful with me because I cannot do this alone. Oh my gosh. He showed up in such a way. And so the next one is September 4th if you're local. Uh, Now I feel like he's really given me, he's really strengthened my faith because of the other people's faith around me. And he's really shown me kind of in my own life, not in a healing manner, but lowering like the man that got on the roof and they lowered the man down, his friends. That was totally what I needed for me to keep being faithful. I needed someone else to help me carry the load. And they did. And oh my gosh, God showed up. And I'm now so excited for the next one. But that's definitely been an area where he showed up in such a way from beginning to end, but just saying yes to something that felt a little kind of crazy. And then for him to just continue to give me the faith and give me the faith and give me the faith and give me the faith of others. And I think that's kind of the crux of like what I hope everybody hears listening to what I'm saying is you will need to lean into other people's faith time in your life where you will be so tired or so depleted or sad or discouraged or whatever it is to where you're like, I quit. I am done. And you're going to tell some other people, you're going to say, I just quit. I'm done. I don't want to do that. And they're going to go, just pray. And you know what they're doing when they're telling you, just pray? They are covering you in prayer and they are lifting you up because they see something in you. They see God in you and see what God is doing in you in a way that you just can't see in the moment. Like I can tell you with full certainty, last August, I felt like this just can't possibly happen again. My heart felt almost hardened. And yet the other people around me could see what God was doing and could see what God was doing in me. And they're like, they're not letting her quit. And I'm so grateful. We need people in our world that will not let us quit. They
Mm,
might let us sit down for a minute. We can sit down for a minute, but they're
yeah.
not going to let us quit. And I think
Yeah.
those are the most valuable, faithful friends we could have.
Yeah. It reminds me of Moses and Aaron and her like holding up
Yeah.
Moses's arms in that verse. And I am curious to your thoughts on how do you kind of discern when, like in that moment where you're like, I want to quit, I want to, I want to not do this again. Like, how do you kind of discern that of like when God's saying to stop or when God's saying to persevere? Because I feel like we each have those crossroads sometimes where it can feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this, but God's like, keep going on. But then there's other times I think where maybe God is saying to set something down for a season. How did you like, I mean, obviously I know you talked about prayer, but was there anything else that kind of helped you in discerning that?
Something that has been meaningful to me also, when I sat down and laid down the podcast for a season, which I don't do it as often anymore, but that first time I was like, should I quit or should I not? I had two trusted women in my world, and it was the same thing with Hear Her Story. It was the core group of the worship team. Because truly, it's not like a big team. There's no big team. It's like these girls and then me. But I had the two trusted women, and I was like, I need you all to pray, or I need you two to pray. Um, and let's reconvene on a Wednesday. It was like the following Wednesday, and we reconvened. And they both really felt like I needed to lay it down. I felt like I also needed to lay it down for that season. And so I felt so much confirmation because Mary, my mentor, she spoke and hear her story. And then Outlet, who was our neighbor when I was a child, her faith is just amazing. I knew they are so discerning of the voice of God that I do not even need to wonder if they actually prayed or if they actually heard. Like I felt so certain in that. And then the same thing with Hear Her Story. When I asked just this core group, I was like, I just need you all to pray. And when they felt like this is the enemy trying to get in the way, really, really powerful for the Lord. It was almost like, like, hello, like, you got to wake up. Like, oh my gosh, that was Satan. Like Satan, it was an attack from the enemy to just completely derail something that God had started. And so when I look at both of those, yes, it was the power of prayer through other believers, but it was one was revealing the attacks of the enemy, and one was just revealing God's perfect timing. I can look back now too and see the one in August with the Hear Her Story where I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I had so many thorns in my sides all at once. And so I knew that was the enemy. And the one from 2021, like that was just peace. I actually have it written somewhere here in my Bible, what Mrs. Cutlet said. I can only ever call her Mrs. Cutlet. But I wrote it somewhere in here. Oh, she said to me on the phone, Jesus is so pleased with you, Chelsey. He is pleased with who you are, not with what you do. And I think that's something too, that when we feel that should I quit something? And when I say quit, I mean, should I stop? Is the Lord, or is he asking me to stop? Is he asking me to pause? I think ultimately, whatever we land at, we need to remember that he is just pleased with who we are. I look at his face all the time before he has a sporting event and I say, I love you for who you are, not for what you do. And I know that's what the Lord thinks of when he looks at us. Like, yes, God's up there thinking, I am so glad you obeyed me. I am so proud of Hear Her Story. But Chelsey, I love you and I am proud of you even without that. And I think there's just such grace in that to know that even if something is a door closed, that something is over and it's not going to open again, it's not because I didn't do it good enough or I didn't try hard enough or I didn't hustle hard enough. It's just he's pleased with who I am and not with what I do. He loves what I do. He loves pouring me out as a vessel, but ultimately, he just loves me for who I am.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder that I think we all need from time to time, especially in
the type of culture we live in where it is constantly like this approval for what you do or whatever. It's like your worth is defined by what you do rather than who you are. And so I think that's such a great reminder to kind of like wrap things up with. And one fun thing that I love to ask at the end of each episode is just what is something bringing you joy lately that maybe we can share in?
Oh my goodness. This might sound really shallow, you guys. I'm sorry. But I tried Poppy for the first time ever.
I love Poppy.
The orange flavored Poppy, it made me so happy. And it sounds so silly, but today we just ran out to the grocery store, which is why I'm thinking about it, because my son also really liked them. And he's like, Mom, there's Poppy on an end cap. And we like all picked out our favorite Poppy. And so I would say it's more of a shared joy with my kids.
Yeah.
Very much a shared joy. But then I will say, and I'm like, maybe this is why I brought this in here with me. But something that's bringing me definitely spiritual joy, I'm doing this devotion for the second time. It's called Fruitful.
Cool.
And it's cultivating a spiritual harvest that won't leave you empty. It is so good. I did it last summer and I knew as school was ending, I was like, I'm going to do it again. And it's really, really good. So
yeah,
that's
I'll have to check that out.
That's bringing me some deep spiritual joy. Poppy is bringing me some earthly, fleshly joy that I need.
Yeah. Hey, we need both. We need both types. I love that. Well, how can everyone connect with you? How can they find your books and all of that? I'll link everything in the show notes as well.
So I'm on Instagram. That's my social media of choice. It's just at Chelsey DeMatteis. My website's chelseydemmatteis.com. On the website, you can sign up for a newsletter. I just send out a short devotion every Friday. And my books you can get on Amazon. And yes, this next book, Mercy in the Margin, will be out next August 1st of 2026. So
that is so exciting and so fun. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I've loved our conversation and we'll have to get coffee soon.
Thanks for having me. I agree.